Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by Fred and Lou Hartwig and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, that weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly. Just one topic tonight, the midterm elections plus roast and toast. But first, our Ruckus newsmaker, Brian Newby, the election commissioner of Johnson County. Mr. Newby has held the post since 2005 and has been appointed and reappointed by both Democratic and Republican secretaries of state. Johnson County is the largest county in the state and the largest election jurisdiction in the metro area. Tuesday was a busy day, and Johnson County Election Commissioner Brian Newby joins us now to talk about it. Welcome, Brian. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
I'm sure you've been busy and probably a bit tired. Are you recovering now from all the excitement and work of Election Day?
Well, we definitely are tired, but we have the canvass on Monday, so we are now in the heavy-duty process of getting provisional ballots sorted because there's still lots of counting to go, and we'll probably actually have Veterans Day off on Tuesday, which often doesn't happen. This is one of the rare years we get Veterans Day off because usually things continue going, but we think it's going to end on Monday.
Were you busier than usual this year because of the large national focus on Kansas due to the Brownback-Davis race and the Roberts-Orman race? Did you have a lot more in the way of news coverage than in a typical election year?
We had it in two ways. It was definitely busier, and one was the news coverage. You know, CNN was there the entire day, and that was great. It was fun.
What happened? Did they just follow you around?
Right. They wanted to do everything that they felt was just, we would maybe take as very routine. You know, like there's a lot of what we would consider boring, but I think we want people to understand the election administration. I even have a blog, electiondiary.com, about that, and they wanted that kind of stuff. So they wanted to have us, as we walked the CD from the tabulation server to another computer to put it in, to upload it to the web. That was a joke, I thought, to me, because they said, "Oh, Wolf's going to love that," you know. And
Wolf Blitzer, right?
Yeah, and they wanted to be there as we saw the results come off the server, so that they could be the first to say the interim results, and that was a big deal to them to be first. And they were actually at different places throughout the country, and so it was kind of weird later to watch that. It was kind of like comparing your camp counselor to the one that was in Colorado or elsewhere, and comparing our crew, because we got to know them so well, they became kind of like family for a day.
How was the turnout in Johnson County? I think it was fairly significant, wasn't it? About 50%?
It's really what we thought. It was 50%, and there was more maybe in advance voting towards the end. But one of the things is it was really busy, you know, at the polling place, because we've reduced polling places. We've been reducing them just from a cost standpoint, and I think we've really kind of hit the nub. And so it was busy just because we've kind of gone from maybe we've reduced our polling places by a third, so it felt like a presidential election to our workers, and then we could use more workers. And that was the other aspect when we said how busy it was. There were so many poll agents for parties and candidates and that sort of thing, about 400. And if half of them would have been election workers, we would have had one more worker per polling place, and that would have probably made things go even, you know, more smoothly. But I mean, we didn't really have any major issues. It was just very busy.
To the extent that you know now, how many people voted in Johnson County, and what percentage is that of the eligible voters?
Well, we had about 50% turnout, so we had 190,000 people vote, and that's with 380,000 registered voters. But out of the 380,000, there's this number always we don't know of people who have moved, but we can't remove them yet by law, and we think that's about 10%. So probably 50% was really 60% when you take those individuals out.
Why do you suppose that 40 or 50% of the people don't vote?
I think I can't say specifically. I do think maybe there's just an election fatigue at times. You know, a few things, I guess. One is people believe that elections only are the presidential. You know, there's certain people who only are going to vote then. We have about 6 elections a year, so I do think there's election fatigue. I do think compelling races, compelling candidates, that's the way to get turnout, more so than any kind of appeal of it's your civic right and pride and duty and that kind of thing. And these were compelling races. And if I look back in 2010, that was the height of the Tea Party, very comparable turnout. So maybe 50 is the ceiling. You know?
You don't think people were not showing up because they were unhappy about having to show a photo ID?
I don't think so. We thought in 2012, before that was implemented, we were certain that was going to be a big deal, and we'd heard from other states that it was a non-event, was their phrase, and I thought, oh, it's going to be. But like this election, we had 35 people who voted without photo ID. They cast provisional ballots. Many of them will get it to us in time. Probably maybe their wallet was in the car and their wife took their car. You know, we didn't really have many protesters. We've had a couple, but not very many. I don't think that's been a barrier.
Can people register now for the next election?
Yeah, so registration started, and the next election for us is just in December in Roland Park, and then we have a mail ballot in January. But yes, they definitely can be registering right now.
And what's your website?
Our website is jocoelection.org.
And you have a blog somewhere, you said?
Yeah, electiondiary.com. So it's kind of the behind the scenes of election administration.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Good to see you again. That's Johnson County Election Commissioner Brian Newby. Now let's meet the Rockettes and start a ruckus. Yale Abahaka is a columnist with the Kansas City Star. Glenn Grant is president and CEO of the Kansas City Urban League. Mary O'Halloran is a media and communications consultant, and Woody Kozad is president of the Kozad Company, a government relations firm. We're happy to have a studio audience with us this evening. These are folks from the KCPT Producers Society and legacy supporters of KCPT. These are some of the people who work hard to make it happen, to keep KCPT functioning on the air and support Ruckus. We appreciate you coming by. We'll put you back on camera and let you cheer, yell, scream, wave, or whatever you'd like to do. Just cheer anyway. There you are. Okay. The election is over, and it's time for the panel to analyze, criticize, hypothesize, proselytize, and cut down to size the people and issues involved in the midterm elections of 2014. Let's start with a national perspective and work our way back to the local elections and elections of interest locally. First, how should we assess the overall results of the House and Senate races across the country? Republicans strengthened their grip on the U.S. House and took control of the U.S. Senate. So what do these victories and what is being called a wave election tell us about the mood of the electorate? And we'll start with Woody.
Well, it seems as if every election now, every 2 years is a wave election for somebody, and it seems to go back and forth. I agree, oddly enough, with the president on this. The president would have asked you when you said, what's the mood of the electorate? Which electorate? The one that turned out Tuesday, or the one that turned out 2 years ago in November? Or he didn't ask, 2 years before that in November, or 2 years before that when he was first elected. A thing that he and I also probably agree on that he won't talk about is this, that race underlies everything in America, and you have to bring that perspective to the table or you're not being honest about the mood of the electorate. So the question is, which electorate? The African-American electorate is somewhere between satisfied and ecstatic with Barack Obama and the Democratic Party. If everybody else forms a different electorate from that one, they're not very happy. It ranges across that second electorate where they are, but they're not happy. So that basically is the answer to the question. The Democratic Party has now gotten to the place where it needs an African-American turnout that is at least equal to the turnout of the other electorate.
And it doesn't seem to turn out except for presidential elections.
Exactly, and it has to vote, obviously 90% for the Democrats for them to win.
Yeah.
So that's their problem, and it is a problem, and it's a challenge. On the other hand, when it does that, they win. So the Republicans' challenge is, how do we convince just a few points of those African Americans to change their voting pattern? Challenge for the Democrats is, how do we convince white voters, and particularly white male voters, that we really don't hate them and we would like to get their votes?
Let's go over here. Yale, what did the election results say to you about the mood of the country?
Well, it says they are more conservative than a lot of people, and Democrats and probably independents think. In other words, they want to have people there who are going to do something to limit government to a degree. I'll be very interested. I mean, let's actually get into what's going to happen now. Well, the Republicans get to govern a little bit. I mean, they really do have some stuff that they talked about yesterday. Mitch McConnell said yesterday, I will work on getting legislation to the president's desk. Obama said, I will look at some of that legislation. I really think, to kind of to Woody's point, that people actually do want Washington to do something, to actually do something on to reform stuff. You know, the whole health care thing will get, you know, tossed around and maybe no resolution. But yeah, I think people were angry at part of the Democratic Party, a little bit to Woody's point. But I also think the Democrats did an absolutely, generally, pitiful job of talking about how good the economy really is.
Do you agree with that, Mary?
Not entirely. I don't think that it necessarily showed that the country has moved into some ideological ditch called conservatism, because let's take a look at it, Yale. Across the country, wherever the minimum wage,
was on,
a direct involvement of government in the economic life of the country, wherever it was on the ballot, it's on the ballot in my home state of Nebraska, and they passed it in South Dakota, Montana, I can't remember the other two states, maybe Alaska. So, all across the country, environmental issues passed. Marijuana smoking and sales and feeling good.
So what does it tell us then about the mood of the country?
So here's the most important thing, though, Mike, that the people, individual families, do not feel good about their economic position. They are insecure, and whenever a large percentage of the population does not feel economically secure, they want things to change. And I don't care who changes it, just so it gets changed.
What they don't want to hear is you crowing about how good the economy is when they don't feel good about it.
Gwen,
that's too bad, because the economy is bad.
Gwen, what about hang on a
But
second.
not for them.
Gwen, Yale said that the Democrats did a terrible job of talking about what they have achieved and what the differences are in the economy. Are you in agreement with that?
They ran a horrible, horrible election across the country. They abandoned their principles. They didn't stand behind the president. They didn't point out that the economy has recovered significantly since he took office. They didn't point out that in spite of all of the rancor around Affordable Care Act that people are enrolling, they should have stood their ground. So they stood for nothing and they gained nothing.
Quickly, should Obama have been on the campaign trail for more of these candidates?
Well, you know, that's neither. I don't know that that's important enough as that they should have held their ground. I mean, his approval rating is very low. But I think the Republicans also need to take note that their overall approval rating is very low. So this is not necessarily.
We got to move ahead. Races in Kansas for governor and senator seem so close for so long that political junkies hate to see them end. But they have, so we have to check the results. First, the contest between Governor Sam Brownback and House Minority Leader Paul Davis. Most of the polls seem to indicate that Davis was going to win a narrow victory over the incumbent. Instead, it went the other way. Brownback gets a second term. So, Mary, what do you think happened to change the mood of the electorate there?
Well, I don't think the mood changed. I think that there was a slight shift in the number of Republicans, in the number of conservative Republicans voting because of the Pat Roberts campaign. I actually believe that the Pat Roberts campaign saved Sam Brownback from an obvious victory on the part of Paul Davis's campaign. Paul was moving forward slowly. It kind of come to a little halt briefly because of the almost unbelievable nature of the slimy, sleaziest ads I have ever seen mailed to anybody's house since I've been in politics. Paul Davis is a good and decent man. And to try to connect him to some horrendous murder in Wichita and suggest he was this election is about sex, drugs, and politics.
About really judges, did it, and court rulings, not with Davis himself.
No, that's Davis endangered your family.
Actually endangered your family.
Yeah.
Paul also, I have to say, he's such a good guy that he did not respond fast enough to the worst of the attacks. Secondly, people did come out and say, you know, they returned to the party, the Republican electorate, and said, we're going to vote for Mr. Roberts. We can't bring ourselves to
Is it possible the Kansans thought that enough money was being given to educational institutions? Let me finish the question. Is it possible that Kansans thought that enough money was being allocated to education and they didn't want to pay more taxes and therefore voted for the man who took those positions?
No,
that's not.
No.
Woody, you think that's possible?
Yeah, Woody, what do you Let's ask Woody.
In Johnson County, Kansas, at least, you can always get them to do more financially, want to do more financially for K through 12 education. So, no, I don't think that was true. I think, however, that speaking of lies, the Davis campaign built itself on a falsehood, which was that Sam Brownback had slashed education spending, when in fact, as Yale's column said, it's basically been kind of flat. And in other states, his argument should have been in other states it's going way ahead, and here it's flat. Instead, he lied and said it's been slashed. And eventually that catches up with you, and it dawns on people.
Spending is down $85 from the time that Brownback took office. $85.
So that was a mistake that Davis made. Now, otherwise, I want to agree with something Mary said, which is when Orman ran and Harry Reid and Claire McCaskill got cute and got behind him, they wound up helping Brownback. I wouldn't say necessarily it's different in the margin, but it definitely made Brownback.
The Get Out the Vote campaign in Kansas was impressive, to say the very least, for Pat Roberts. There were 100,000 phone calls a day, and I got at least 1,000 of them.
That's what a lot of people are saying, that the Koch brothers / dark money in this race, in these two races actually, made a lot of difference in mobilizing Republicans, and especially in western Kansas, but also in Johnson County. I think that's dead on. I think they did energize. They didn't want to lose Brownback. They didn't want to lose Roberts. They didn't want to lose that influence. And the other thing is, just getting back to Davis, he eventually turned out to be not a good candidate to run against Brownback because he did not stand for enough. Hey, I'm going to change this. Here's what I'm going to do. He just said, well, I'll have to look at it. He had to stand for more.
Let me move ahead
to
here
beat
for a second.
Brownback.
I want to talk about the Senate race in Kansas because it got as much national attention as any congressional race this year. An incumbent U.S. Senator Pat Roberts, a Republican in this profoundly Republican state, found his back against the wall, facing a tough challenge from independent Greg Orman. Instead of a tight race, it was a blowout. Roberts won by double digits. How do you figure, Gwen?
Well, he pulled out. I think what happened here is that Roberts' campaign, they ran a campaign against Obama and Harry Reid. And that turned the tide in Roberts' favor significantly, because prior to the Republican Party coming in and helping Roberts, he was really, I think, seriously in trouble. But you have to give credit to the campaign that they ran. I mean, it was very, very powerful, and they just convinced the Kansas electorate that they wanted to win a majority of the Senate, and that's what happened.
Well, they convinced certain voters in Kansas.
Well, enough of them. I mean, about 10%. 10% more than Orman.
Greg Orman is a highly unusual guy. I mean, this is a successful businessman from Olathe who simply said, I'm not going to sit by and watch this anymore. He jumped in and not only made a race, but scared this U.S. senator who's been there for 30
And we hear so much about Johnson County being the home of moderate Republicans, and yet Roberts won in Johnson County, Brownback won, and Chris Kobach won in Johnson County. All right. There were few elections in Kansas City or Missouri that seemed to grab the electorate's attention. The Kansas City Council and mayor races are next spring, and the Jackson County executive race was hardly a battle, with incumbent Mike Sanders winning another landslide. In Johnson County, however, there were some commission races of interest. Commission Chair Ed Eilert was looking for a second term, and Yale, he got it.
He did get it. I think the race was definitely closer than I thought it was going to be. I mean, 53 to 47%.
Tricia Leitner was his opponent.
Tricia Leitner, not necessarily a no-name person, but certainly nowhere near the years of service that Ed's given as mayor and as a commission member there. So that was really showing that kind of conservative tide to a degree, although certainly Ed is even liberal or even probably a moderate. So that's going to be good in that Ed can kind of coalesce against or with some people on the commission to maybe do some stuff for the two most important things facing the county right now: improving the libraries and improving the park system. Those are the two major things that they have some power to do, as opposed to everything else running on automatic pilot. And in the other races where now Schaefer beat
Laura
McConwell, Ron Schaefer, and basically now you have all white men being it's Johnson County, so you have to have all white men, I guess there. And I think either one of them would have been fine. I mean, Mr. Schaefer is very capable and going to be a good addition. So it was not an exciting election by any chance. I just think the Ida election was closer than people thought it would be.
Well, it's never an exciting election when Ed Eilert's running, because Ed
not an excitable guy.
He doesn't want any issues. He just puts his name on the ballot and the votes come forth.
Well, why does it work for him? Because he was mayor of Overland Park for years? And
you'd have to go back 30 years to talk about how he got there and all that kind of thing. And then the perception of being moderate when he's not now. He's moved way to the right. But the thing I wanted to add to what Yale said is that Mayor Schaefer is a very quiet fellow, and he's elected to the Northeast District on the commission. And Laura McConwell was expected to win that race, but I think that the fact that she could not figure out how to fill that hole on Shawnee Mission Drive, where there used to be a Giant's shopping mall, and a number of other fiascos as mayor of Mission, really kind of cooked her goose. So she tried to run, elect me because I'm a woman.
She wasn't expected to win. Nobody expected her to win.
Oh,
she came in distant second in the primary.
She moved way to the right, Yale, if you were involved in the campaign.
Well, I don't care what she moved, but I mean, she wasn't expected to win.
Well, Steve Rose said that
she wasn't expected
Schaefer
to win.
was going to win.
Steve Rose, my
it was
God.
a no contest.
And Mayor Schaefer did not. He's the same guy that he was.
No. Steve Rose said in his predictions about Kansas that Schaefer would win.
Yeah,
that it was an easy victory for him.
Happens.
No, Missouri legislature, let's talk about that for a second. Stays Republican, House and Senate, even more Republican in the House and Senate.
Well, the Senate's the same.
I thought they added a...
We lost a Republican seat. We won a Democratic seat. We won another Democratic seat. So, yeah, we're up one. Pardon me. Yeah,
Proceed.
That's French for yes.
Yeah, I don't work for the Kansas City Star. I'm a Republican. And so we're up in the Senate, and we are and the amazing thing is the House. And right after the House election, we're at 117, and a bunch of us are sitting around, and one of the guys from the state House committee said, mark a date on your calendar, 117. It's never going above that. We've hit the top, guys. At which point, Linda Black, Democratic state rep, announces she's changing parties. And 5 minutes later, sorry, it's 118. Mark that date. And so I've got to find a new favorite Democrat, because she was my favorite Democrat, but now she's...
Gwen, what about this amendment in Missouri that passed affecting the governor's control of the budget?
That was really not a good thing at all. I oppose that amendment because the Constitution requires the governor to balance the budget. So when you take away his ability to act within the law to balance the budget, he's constrained. So now you give that to that responsibility to the legislature. The budget has to be balanced. So when when he sits down with his administration and they look at that budget, now he can't do that. He has no flexibility in how to get there, and so there are only certain places in the budget you can cut. I think this whole notion of putting it out there that he's protecting education was really not a clear way of educating the voter, and that's why it won. And I don't think they did a good job of putting the facts out there about how the budget process works.
And very quickly, Yale, as I mentioned, Mike Sanders won resoundingly, Jackson County Executive, third term. What's next for him?
I hope he serves out the entire term here. I think he's been a great county executive, and they're going to be all these statewide offices, but you're making an impact on the local area. Stay here.
All right,
what's next for Mike is the railroad.
Time now for Roast and Toast, where the Rockettes offer a pat on the back or a kick in the pants to people and events in the news. We start this evening with Woody.
Well, I came in here with one, and I changed it in the middle of the deal, and I'm going to give a toast to two people in Kansas, Governor Brownback and Chris Kobach. Both of them have been subjected to a pretty much endless, what we call earned media, negative earned media on television, in the papers, and so on, despite which they both won by bigger margins than most of us had expected. So a toast to them.
All right, Gwen.
I'm toasting President Obama for the manner in which he conducted himself in the press conference yesterday, especially for stating that he is willing to find common ground with Mitch McConnell and the Republican Party so that this government can get back to the business of governing. I also commend him for making it really clear that he will use the power of the pen and use executive order to grant legal status to undocumented immigrants.
Well, a new leader has come forth in Johnson County in the state of Kansas during this political season, and his name is Finn Bullers. He's my new hero, and I want to toast him today. Finn Bullers, as you know, is a former reporter for the Kansas City Star who's stricken with muscular dystrophy and has diabetes and a number of other things, and he is wheelchair bound. He found the energy and the strength within himself to lead a campaign of telling the people of Kansas the truth about Sam Brownback's attack on people most in need in the state, and he became their voice. A great advocate has been born.
Well, 4 toasts in a row, I guess. This is actually for the voters of Missouri. The Republican legislature put 2 sham proposals on the ballot, constitutional amendments, and voters rejected both of them. One was an early voting thing, which was not really a good early voting idea, and the other one was basically squash the teachers amendment. And voters overwhelmingly rejected both. It was actually quite interesting to see, so that's very good for Missouri voters.
And 5 toasts tonight. A toast to Republican Joni Ernst, who became the first woman ever elected to the U.S. Senate from Iowa. Better still, a toast to the commercial where she talked about growing up down on the farm and castrating hogs.
I'm Joni Ernst. I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm. So when I get to Washington, I'll know how to cut pork.
Apparently the commercial worked. Voters went whole hog for Joni. And that is Ruckus for this week. We're back next Thursday at 7 when Ron Freeman and Mary Ann Murray Simons join Mary and Yale on the Ruckus panel. Thanks again to the folks who joined us here in the studio. Give yourselves a nice round of applause for all the hard work that you have encountered during the past few minutes. Thanks very much to all of you for joining us as well. Back next Thursday evening at 7 o'clock here on KCPT. Now, on behalf of the Ruckettes and all the Ruckus crew, I'm Mike Shannon. Thanks very much for watching, and good night.